part 2 of the Forest Park to St. Charles trip, we'll pursue the trail of the Chicago Great Western from Villa Park to St. Charles. For this part of the journey, we'll travel most of it by bicycle, but complete the final portion by automobile. From the Elmhurst Station, both the Chicago Great Western and the Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin railways continued to run in parallel until shortly after passing over Salt Creek and Illinois Route 83, also known as the Robert Kingery Highway. At which point, the Chicago Great Western veered gently off in a west-northwest direction, while the Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin headed west-southwest, with the well-renowned Oelwein factory nestled neatly between the two trackways. The trip from the Elmhurst Station to the Villa Park Station was 1.6 miles and took about 4 minutes according to train schedules.
Today, much of the Oelwein factory has been demolished or converted into townhomes and condominiums as part of the Oelwein Court development. Just across the street from Oelwein Court to the west of Villa Avenue is the trailhead for the east segment of the Great Western Trail. A welcoming brick and wrought iron archway built in 2017 serves as an eastern gateway to the trail. The Great Western Trail is another rails-to-trails conversion that has been converted piecemeal through the previous few decades, as portions of the right-of-way have been sold off at different times by the Chicago and Northwestern Railway, which inherited the Chicago Great Western's trackage and route. This eastern portion of the Great Western Trail was started in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and today extends on a crushed limestone path almost 13 miles to West Chicago, Illinois.
Heading west from the trailhead, we need travel only 300 feet before we reach the Villa Park Station, still very much intact and in situ, just to the south of the former trackway. The Villa Park Station first appeared on the earliest CGW route maps as the Lewis Crossing Station. However, it then seemed to disappear for a few decades, until a new station was built in 1926, primarily to service the Oelwein factory, just to the east of the station, as well as to provide goods and freight for the newly emerging Villa Park and Ardmore subdivisions. The Villa Park Station was not a major passenger stop along the Chicago to St. Charles route, and in fact was a flag stop.
The Villa Park Station was located on the south side of the CGW tracks, and as we'll see, this was the norm for stations west of the Salt Creek, till at least through St. Charles, Illinois. As this station was built a few decades after most of the original CGW stations were built, it has a different design. It is approximately 50 feet long by 15 feet wide, with a hip roof and wide eaves.
With the closure of CGW passenger stations in the late 1950s, the station was purchased by the village of Villa Park, and in subsequent years it was used for storage and as a warming house for a nearby outdoor ice rink in Cortese Park. In the late 1990s, it was renovated to its original condition by volunteers Bob Neiman and Dave Elliott. You can still visit this very nicely restored historic station at its original location, just west of the Great Western Trailhead, and just to the north of Cortese Park, along Myrtle Avenue in Villa Park, Illinois. The next stop along the Chicago Great Western to the west was the Lombard Station.
From the Villa Park Station, the Lombard Station lay about 2.5 miles west and took about 5 minutes to travel on the train. On the way, we'll pass over a pedestrian bridge spanning the Union Pacific Railroad, St. Charles Road, and Gray Street, built as a major Great Western Trail improvement in 2012, which vastly improved public safety and reconnected the two segments of the eastern portion of the Great Western Trail. This pedestrian bridge replaced a CGW bridge used by the railway for perhaps 100 years. The Lombard Station was located about 100 feet east of Main Street and 170 feet south of Prairie Avenue in Lombard, Illinois. Like the Villa Park Station, the Lombard Station was situated on the south side of the tracks.
Based on aerial photographs from the first half of the 20th century, the station was approximately 80 feet long by 25 feet wide, with a gable roof and wide eaves. It was likely of wood frame construction and followed the typical Chicago Great Western design template. Although initially a passenger station, the depot later primarily served freight traffic for the Lombard community, including a large lumber yard which stood just south of the trackway.
As we travel along this line of the Chicago Great Western, it is worth noting that the CGW was primarily used for freight, with limited passenger and commuter service. Passing through many agricultural landscapes, their bread and butter freight was often dairy products, such as milk and butter. Perhaps they realized early on that they could not effectively compete with some of the other local railways, such as the Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin Railway, which offered faster and more frequent commuter service. For efficiency, the CGW used longer trains pulled by larger locomotives, meaning that there were fewer trains from which passengers could choose. As the railway struggled financially in the mid-1950s, they decided to cut all passenger service along this route as a means of cost-cutting.
The village of Lombard was founded in 1869 by Chicago banker and capitalist Josiah Lombard, who developed the area as an early commuter community. The depot also benefited from a robust dairy industry, which leveraged the railway station as a milk stop. There is unfortunately no trace of the Lombard Station today, as it was demolished sometime between 1968 and 1978, based on aerial photographs. The area now being populated with residential buildings and well-manicured yards.
The next stop along the line was the North Glen Station, approximately 2.4 miles to the west, and with a train travel time of 4 minutes. The North Glen Station was located about 100 feet west of North Main Street in Glen, Illinois, midway between Paw Street to the north and the aptly named Railroad Street to the south. The North Glen Station stood to the south of the tracks, according to local histories, and mainly served as a milk stop for local farmers. However, due to low ridership, the passenger station closed down in the 1920s. Although it continued as a car siding and freight stop for some years thereafter.
The station had a somewhat unique design relative to other CGW stations. It was of wood frame construction with a cobbled stone foundation, a steepled watchtower, shake siding in the gables, and a gabled awning jutting off at an angle from the main building towards Main Street and Railroad Street to the southeast.
1939 aerial photos of the location indicate that the station had long been demolished by this time, as there is no sign of the station or the parking area in the images. North Glen is an unincorporated community in Milton Township, DuPage County, just about a mile north of Glen, Illinois. The next stop along the route is Gretna, which later became Carroll Stream. Ready?
Continuing our journey towards St. Charles, About 2.2 miles to the west was Gretna Station, which would have taken 4 minutes to travel by train. Gretna Station was approximately 100 feet west of South Main Place and 150 feet north of St. Charles Road, in what is today Carroll Stream, Illinois. The Gretna Station was situated on the south side of the tracks. It was a modest wooden frame building, approximately 28 feet long by 15 feet wide, with gabled ends.
The community of Gretna was started in the latter part of the 19th century. It was largely settled by Southern German emigrants of the Catholic faith, and will see the site of their former church just a short distance to the west along the railway.
For the Chicago Great Western Railway, as this was a largely agricultural area, Gretna was a milk stop for shipping dairy products, milk, butter, and cheese, to markets to the east and west. In time, Gretna was subsumed by nearby Carroll Stream, a village incorporated in 1959 and named for the daughter of the subdivision developer, J. Stream. The station location is today the site of a building materials and concrete plant, with a great deal of truck traffic moving materials from the plant to delivery sites. The materials plant had been in existence in the latter years of the station's operation.
When the Chicago Great Western closed down in the late 1960s, the Gretna Station building was fortunately preserved by the Carroll Stream Park District and Carroll Stream Historical Society. And in 1976, it was relocated to Armstrong Park in Carroll Stream, about 2 miles away. The restored station can still be visited today, west of the parking area at Armstrong Park, just off of Ellyn Drive in Carroll Stream, Illinois.
As we head out of the Gretna Station heading west, just 1,000 feet down the line, we'll see a cemetery to the north of the Great Western Trail, in the midst of an industrial area and with no access roads leading to it. This is St. Stephen's Cemetery, once serving the agricultural community of Gretna from the mid-19th century until the early 20th century, with the last burial taking place in 1910. St. Stephen's Catholic Church once stood just to the east of the cemetery and served the community from the mid-1850s until 1889, when it was forced to close, largely because there was no longer an access road to the church or the cemetery, due to the Chicago Great Western right-of-way hemming it in. Shortly after closure, the church was dismantled, and parishioners were moved to St. Michael's Catholic Church in Wheaton and St. John the Baptist Church in Winfield, Illinois.
After decades of abandonment and vandalism, the cemetery and adjoining prairie were finally protected and restored as a result of a collaboration between concerned community members, the Milton Township government, and the Catholic Church's Diocese of Joliet. The cemetery and grave markers were restored and were then safeguarded with a protective fence and lighting. Today, the cemetery and adjoining grounds are maintained by the Milton Township Cemeteries Authority.
Not too much farther west, about 1,000 feet down the line, you can still see one of the few remaining artifacts along the CGW line, on the south side of the trackway. The early route maps of the Chicago Great Western from the late 1890s show the next stop as Plains Crossing, which seems to be east of the west branch of the DuPage River and what appears to be Klein Creek. Although not to scale, the map suggested this station was also likely west of what is today Pleasant Hill Road. However, like the West Maywood Station, this depot was short-lived and does not appear on subsequent route maps or schedules. As a result, we cannot affix its location with any certainty.
From Gretna, for most of the Chicago Great Western's existence, the next station was Ingalton, which lies more than 5 miles to the west. The train would have traveled the distance in approximately 8 minutes. The Ingalton Station was located a little more than 500 feet west of Illinois Route 59, or Neltner Boulevard, and 150 feet south of Waynwood Drive, and was located on the south side of the tracks for most, if not all, of its existence.
The station was a wood-frame structure about 30 feet long by 15 feet wide, with wide eaves, sporting the standard Chicago Great Western design. Towards the latter part of its lifetime, as with many of these older stations, the building lost much of its Victorian architectural personality. The station stood until sometime between 1978 and 1987, when it appears to have either been torn down or fallen down. You can still see the ruins of this station along the south side of the Great Western Trail. The concrete slab foundation and heaps of rubble.
Like Gretna, Ingalton was largely an agricultural station stop, a milk stop, where dairy products would be freighted to the east and west. Ingalton also featured a substantial train yard and siding along the north side of the trackway, extending from the station to more than 2,000 feet to the west, where dozens of train cars would be temporarily stored. This rail yard was used extensively well into the 1980s. Today, only a few rusting rails hiding beneath the grass and brush on the north side of the trackway remain as a remnant of the siding that once dominated this site.
The eventual disappearance of Ingalton into the folds of suburbia is like so many other agricultural communities that once sustained farmers and their families across the American homesteading landscape over the past 200 years. Unlike most rural towns, which longed for a single railroad to aid their community, Ingalton had the benefit of two: the Chicago Great Western, with a full station in its town center, and the Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin commuter railway, with a full station on its perimeter, just a mile to the east at Prince Crossing. Personal travel and the shipping of goods to St. Charles, Elgin, or Chicago, and everywhere in between, were accessible to the residents, farmers, and businesses of this community. But like Gretna to the east, Ingalton never managed to leverage these two railways for growth, and instead relied on them for sustenance, primarily as milk stops. As the railway's influence faded from the area, so too did Ingalton, before eventually being assimilated into nearby West Chicago.
For the final segment of the Chicago to St. Charles route, we'll soon need to leave our bicycles and once again follow the trail via automobile, as the east portion of the Great Western Trail ends a third of a mile west of the Ingalton Station at Sassafras Drive in West Chicago. The CGW trip from Ingalton to the St. Charles Station was a little over 5 miles, and the trip by train took 12 minutes to complete, according to train schedules. But we'll have to stitch together these 5 remaining miles, section by section, by driving from one road railway intersection to another.
As we'll discover, quite a bit of the former trackage of the Chicago Great Western still survives in West Chicago, extending to the DuPage County line, as it continued to serve the Canadian National Railway for decades after the Chicago Great Western vacated the right-of-way.
From Sassafras Drive, we can see that the former railway continues onward from the Great Western Trail with a single trackway. The tracks appear to have seen little use in recent years. Just about 500 feet to the west of Sassafras Drive, a siding can be seen heading off to the south.
A third of a mile to the west of Sassafras Drive, along Atlantic Drive, between Shingle Oak Drive to the north and Winston Drive to the south in West Chicago. The railroad crossing is still very much in good repair, with a single trackway heading off in both east and west directions.
From here, for a little more than a half a mile westward, the trackway continues, ending at Cress Creek and the Canadian National Railway crossing. At one time, there was once a CGW bridge that extended over the Canadian National Railway line and Cress Creek, but that bridge no longer stands, except for the support piers that held up each end of the bridge. We know that these supports still stand from recent aerial photos.
At Powis Road and north of Arthur Drive, we can see the line of trees marking the former CGW trackway to the east, although the track itself has been torn up. Likewise, looking to the west, towards the edge of the DuPage County Airport, we can see the former trackway ridge that extends more than 1,000 feet towards the airfield.
About 1 mile to the west, at Couts Road, the location of the former CGW Railroad crossing still stands today, between Ohio Avenue to the north and Stern Avenue to the south, with a single trackway extending in both directions. Just to the east of Couts Road is the likely location of another short-lived station along this branch, that being Harvey's Crossing, which shows up on early route maps, but then quickly disappears from later maps and schedules. From here, trackage and right-of-way continues onwards to the west into St. Charles Township, Kane County, Illinois, and is today owned by the Union Pacific Railroad.
3/4 of a mile to the west, at Kirk Road, between Duquesne Drive to the north and Stern Avenue to the south. Once again, the railroad crossing infrastructure is still intact, maintained by the Union Pacific Railroad, along with an infrequently used trackway heading east and west.
Another 3/4 of a mile to the west, we reach Tyler Road in St. Charles, Illinois. Union Pacific owns the right-of-way from the east to just a short distance east of Tyler Road. The city of St. Charles owns most of the right-of-way thereafter. You can still see vestiges of the old railroad piled along the former CGW right-of-way and on both sides of Tyler Road.
At 13th Avenue in St. Charles, Illinois, another half mile to the west, and just 300 feet south of Illinois Route 64. The ridge of the former CGW trackway is readily apparent and passes over the road, with the old rail line evident in both directions, heading east and west.
"600 feet further west, at about where 11th Avenue intersects with Route 64, the CGW had a grade-level crossing, passing across Route 64 to the northwest at a 35-degree angle. Yet another 600 feet to the west-northwest brought the train safe home to the St. Charles Station, located just to the west of 9th Avenue, between State Avenue and Cedar Avenue in St. Charles, Illinois."
We'll end this first leg of the Great Chicago Western Journey here, and talk about the St. Charles Station in detail when we take you on the next segment, the 20 miles extending into the Illinois Prairie, from St. Charles to Sycamore, Illinois. We'll see you then.